It's just another busy day at the Tesla dealership. The air is filled with excitement as customers browse the latest models, discussing features, colors, and tech specs. The showroom is sleek, modern, and filled with luxury cars that are the epitome of wealth and success. At the center of it all is the salesman, a young guy named Brian, who's been working hard to make a big sale. He's been eyeing the perfect customer all day, the one who will walk in, fall in love with a car, and make a purchase. He's confident today will be his lucky day. Brian watches as potential buyers enter, a mix of professionals and families, but then the door swings open again. This time it's not a well-dressed customer walking through, it's a homeless man. His clothes are tattered and dirty, his shoes are worn down, and his hair is unkempt. He doesn't fit in here. Brian looks at him, skeptical. Why would someone like this come into a place like Tesla? The man walks past the expensive cars, glancing at them curiously. But Brian can't help but feel this will just be another waste of time. Little does Brian know, today's encounter will change everything. Brian watches as the homeless man moves further into the showroom. He's clearly out of place here, and Brian can't help but judge. He's been working in sales long enough to know that people who look like this can't afford the cars on display. Brian casually glances at his watch. Maybe this will be a short conversation. The homeless man looks at the Teslas, eyes wandering over the sleek bodies and shiny exteriors. He seems fascinated by them. His fingers lightly trace the side of a Model S. Brian raises an eyebrow, shaking his head. Is he just here to waste my time? Brian wonders. As the man inspects the cars, Brian steps forward, trying to look approachable, but also a little detached, not wanting to get too involved. The man looks up at him and gives a slight nod. Nice cars, he says, his voice calm but with a certain interest in it. Brian puts on a professional smile, though he's thinking to himself, he's probably just looking, dreaming of something he can never afford. He figures he'll humor him for a bit. Yes, sir. These are some of our most popular models. Maybe something a little more affordable would be a better fit for you, though. The homeless man doesn't seem bothered by the comment. He continues looking, asking questions about the cars, almost as if he already knows everything there is to know. Brian can't help but feel a little surprised. Most people who walk in looking like this wouldn't even be able to pronounce half the features of a Tesla, let alone ask detailed questions. But the man doesn't seem like just another curious bystander. Brian still thinks this is probably just a waste of time, but he can't help but wonder, what's this man really after? The homeless man continues to walk around, studying the cars closely. His attention to detail doesn't go unnoticed by Brian, who can't help but be a bit intrigued. The man asks about the battery life, the autopilot features, even the safety ratings. It's clear that he knows what he's talking about. Brian starts to feel a little less sure of himself. Do you think this model could handle a long road trip? The man asks, his eyes still focused on a Model 3. Brian hesitates for a second before answering, trying to keep his cool. Oh, absolutely. It's perfect for long drives, especially with the autopilot feature. You wouldn't have to do much yourself on the highway. But, I'm sure you're looking for something more in your price range. The man looks at Brian, still calm and collected. I'm not worried about the price. Brian, still not convinced, chuckles quietly. Right? I'm sure this is all just for fun, huh? The homeless man doesn't react to the joke, which makes Brian feel a little awkward. Instead, the man simply nods. I've been saving up for a while. A long while. Brian is taken aback. Oh, you're saving for a car? He says, trying to keep the surprise out of his voice. The man's gaze doesn't shift. Yes, for a long time. A car like this. He gestures to the Model S in the corner. Brian is caught off guard. He can't help but smirk to himself. Sure you are. But the man's calm, steady demeanor doesn't change. He looks like someone who knows exactly what he wants, and he isn't going to let Brian's doubts get in his way. The homeless man continues to walk around, still absorbed in the details of the car. Brian watches, not knowing whether to dismiss him or take him seriously. He's still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. Everything about this guy screams that he's not the typical Tesla buyer. His clothes, his appearance, none of it fits. But then, the man says something that makes Brian stop in his tracks. I've been looking for a Tesla for a while now, the homeless man says, his tone calm and matter of fact. Brian, unsure if he's hearing things right, laughs nervously. You've been looking for a Tesla? I mean, that's a pretty big investment. The man looks up at him, his eyes sharp. Yes, I've been saving, for a long time. Brian chuckles to himself, thinking it's all just talk. I get it. Sure, but Teslas aren't cheap. You've got to be prepared for the cost. A lot of people, they dream about owning one, but it's a whole different thing when it comes to actually buying one. The homeless man doesn't flinch, he simply nods, and for a moment, Brian wonders if he's just humoring him. But then something happens that takes Brian completely off guard. The man reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a checkbook. Brian's eyes widen in disbelief. The man calmly writes something on the check. Slowly he hands it to Brian. Brian's heart skips a beat. He takes the check, glancing down at the amount written on it, unsure if he's seeing things clearly. Wait, is this real? Brian stutters, his voice shaky. The homeless man doesn't say a word. He just watches Brian, patiently waiting. Brian stands there, holding the check, his mind racing. He stares at it, unsure of what to do. His hands begin to shake slightly as he examines the numbers. It's a large sum, more money than Brian has ever seen in one place. His eyes flicker back to the homeless man, still standing there with his hands folded calmly in front of him, waiting. Is this really for a Tesla? Brian asks. His voice barely above a whisper. He feels like he's in a dream. The check looks real. The numbers on it are too large to ignore, but it still doesn't make sense. A homeless man writing a check for a luxury car? It doesn't add up. The homeless man nods slowly, still not speaking. His expression is serious. There's no sign of joking or playfulness in his face. It's like he's completely certain of what he's doing. He's here for a car, and he's got the money to back it up. Brian, still in disbelief, quickly walks to the manager's office. He can't process this on his own. He needs confirmation. He needs someone else to tell him that this is real. He bursts into the office, waving the check in front of the manager, his face pale. Is this check real? I mean, I don't know if I'm seeing things, but this guy, he wants to buy a Tesla. This check, it's huge. It's gotta be a mistake, right? The manager takes the check, looking at it with the same disbelief. His eyes widen too as he verifies the details. He looks at Brian, then back at the check. No mistake, this check is legitimate. Brian's stomach drops. His face flushes with embarrassment as he remembers how he'd treated the homeless man just moments before. The jokes, the assumptions, the mocking thoughts, all of it feels like a slap in the face now. He's completely wrong. His own judgment stings, and the weight of his regret settles in. Brian walks back to the showroom, the check still in his hand. His heart is pounding in his chest. He feels like a fool, but there's no turning back now. The homeless man is still standing there, calm as ever, waiting for Brian to come back. With shaky hands, Brian approaches him, trying to mask his embarrassment. So, everything checks out, he says, his voice a little uncertain. You're serious about the purchase? The homeless man nods, his eyes steady. Yes, I know exactly what I want. Brian, still processing everything, tries to regain his composure. He offers a weak smile. All right, well, let's get you all set up then. The man follows Brian to the desk. There's a slight awkwardness in the air. Brian begins processing the sale, tapping away on the keyboard, trying to keep things moving. He still can't quite believe what's happening. Every word feels surreal. This guy, this homeless man, who Brian had mocked just a few moments ago, is buying a Tesla. The same Tesla that Brian assumed he couldn't possibly afford. As Brian finalizes the paperwork, he tries to make small talk. I mean, I can take you for a test drive if you'd like. Just to make sure it's the right fit for you. The homeless man shakes his head. I don't need a test drive. I've done my research. Brian hesitates but nods. He starts printing out the documents. The man doesn't seem in a rush, but there's a quiet confidence in the way he stands. Brian hands him the keys to the car, but the homeless man doesn't react like most customers. There's no excitement, no jumping up and down, just a calm, quiet satisfaction. With a nod, the homeless man takes the keys. Thank you, he says, his voice still steady, calm. Brian watches as the homeless man walks toward the door, his new keys in hand. The silence in the showroom feels heavy. For the first time that day, Brian feels the weight of everything, his assumptions, his judgment, his misplaced confidence. He stands there, frozen for a moment, watching the man head toward the exit. The man doesn't look back. He just walks out, his posture straight, as if he's done this 100 times before. As the door swings closed behind him, Brian is left alone in the showroom, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. He stares at the empty space where the man had been standing just moments before. His thoughts begin to race, replaying the entire encounter in his mind. How had he been so sure of himself? How had he been so quick to judge based on someone's appearance? The homeless man, who had come in with nothing, had just left with the car Brian thought he could never afford. The sting of his mistake hits hard. He could have treated the man with more respect, been more open-minded, but instead, he had mocked him in his thoughts, assumed he didn't belong here. Brian sighs, looking out the window. He knows he won't forget this moment. The lesson is clear. Don't judge a book by its cover. The showroom is quiet now, but Brian can't shake the image of the homeless man walking out the door. The soft sound of the man's footsteps echoes in his mind as he thinks about how calm he seemed. No excitement, no drama, just a quiet confidence that Brian could hardly understand. Brian glances toward the window and watches as the man gets into the car, a shiny new Tesla. The car's smooth, elegant lines stand in stark contrast to the man's worn clothes, his rough exterior. For a moment, Brian wonders what his life must be like. How had he managed to save up this much money? What was his story? The homeless man starts the car, and it hums to life without a sound. The Tesla glides out of the dealership's parking lot, disappearing down the street. Brian stands there, almost holding his breath, watching the car drive away. He feels a strange mix of awe and regret. This man, who he had dismissed so easily, had just walked away with a car that Brian had assumed he couldn't afford. It's a humbling experience. The reality of it hits Brian hard as he watches the man leave. Brian stands by the window, staring out at the empty parking lot. The sound of the Tesla's engine fades into the distance, leaving him in a heavy silence. He can't stop thinking about the man he had dismissed, judged, and underestimated. It's all coming back to him now. How he had assumed the homeless man couldn't afford a car like that, how he had mocked him in his mind without even realizing it. The lesson is clear, and it stings. It's not about what someone wears or how they look. It's not about their circumstances or their appearance. There's so much more to people than meets the eye. He had allowed himself to fall into the trap of judging someone by a single glance, without considering the full picture. And now he's paying the price for it. Feeling embarrassed, feeling ashamed of his own assumptions. Brian takes a deep breath, his mind replaying everything. He knows he can't undo what happened, but he can learn from it. The homeless man, he wasn't just some guy off the street. He was someone who had worked hard, saved, and fought for what he wanted. Brian realizes that wealth and success don't always come in the package you expect. Sometimes, they come in the most unexpected forms. He looks out the window again, a little wiser. From now on, he'll remember the lesson. Never judge a person based on what they appear to be.